will start talking about the skeleton of the forelimb, and now we will start with the comparative anatomy of the scapula, and in the next video we will move to the humerus, and after that to the radius and so on. Let's get started. The scapula, as you can see here, is a flat bone. The scapula in general is attached to the body by muscles, the shoulder girdle muscles, and here distally articulates with the head of the humerus. The scapula in general has two cervices. This is the lateral cervix. This is the medial cervix. It has three borders. This is the caudal border. This is the cranial border. And this is the dorsal border of the scapula. It has also three angles. This is the cranial angle. This is the caudal angle. And here we have the ventral angle, or the articular angle, or we can name it as glenoid angle, ventral angle. How can we differentiate between the lateral cervix and the medial cervix? Is very easy. It's very easy. On the lateral cervix you can find this structure, this projection here. This is the spine of the scapula, or the scapular spine, where here the medial surface of the scapula is very smooth and doesn't have like something like the spine of the scapula here. Okay, so it's very easy. If you can see the spine of the scapula, that means you're looking at the lateral surface of the scapula. Here we have a scapula of the horse, and after that, of course, we will compare between the horse and other domestic animals. Good. Let's start by the lateral surface. As we said before, is a flat bone. Here between the scapula and the glenoid cavity, so this is the glenoid cavity here in this area. Here we have what's called the neck of the scapula, scapular neck. This is the neck of the scapula. Here the spine of the scapula is located here in some animals in the middle of the scapula. Here in the horse is more cranially, and in all other animals the distal part of the spine of the scapula form like a projection called the acromion. So if you look at this one here in the dog, so the distal part of the spine of the scapula form what's called the acromion or acromial process. This part here. This acromion is absent in the horse, as you can see here. Okay, let's move to the cranial border of the scapula. Here in the horse you can find that the proximal part of this border is convex, while the distal part of the border is concave, as you can see here. The caudal border is slightly like concave, comparing to the cranial one. The dorsal border here, or we can name it the vertebral border, is attached to what's called in live animals, of course, the cartilage of the scapula, or the scapular cartilage is not present here. So it will start from here and go like this here, and the cartilage here is the insertion place, for example, of the rhomboid muscle. The spine of the scapula divide the lateral surface of the scapula into two fossae. The cranial one, this one here, called the supraspinous fossa, the supra, so in front of the spine, the supraspinous fossa, and behind or caudal to the spine of the scapula here we have the infraspinous fossa. The infraspinous fossa. In the horse, you can find that the supraspinous fossa is smaller than the infraspinous fossa. The supraspinous fossa is the origin place of the supraspinatus muscle, while the infraspinous fossa is the origin place of the infraspinatus muscle. Let's move to the medial surface of the scapula. Here in the middle of the medial surface, we have a depression called the subscapular fossa. Subscapular because it's under the scapula. Subscapular fossa. This is the origin of the subscapular muscle. Dorsally or proximally here, we have rough surface or two triangular rough surfaces here and there. This is the serrated face, the insertion area of the ventral serrated muscle, the serrated face. If we move down here, we can see caudally on the caudal or toward the caudal border of the scapula here, a small groove called the vascular groove. This is the vascular groove. Distally here, as we said before, this is the neck of the scapula. Distally, of course, let's start with the glenoid cavity. This is the glenoid cavity, is oval shaped and articulates with the head of the humerus. Cranial here, in this area, we have the glenoid notch. While cranial to the glenoid cavity, we have here what's called the supraglenoid tubercle. The supraglenoid tubercle is very developed in the horse, and this one here, this part is very rough, and this is the origin of the biceps brachii. Muscle. Medial from the supraglenoid tubercle, so let's move, so this is the lateral view again. Medial from this tubercle, here we have another process. This is the coracoid process. Coracoid process is the origin of the coracobrachial muscle. Coracoid process extends from the medial surface of the supraglenoid tubercle. Here, caudally, I forgot to tell you that you can find lines like rough surface. We name these lines as muscular lines. And here, inside the infraspinous fossa, distally we can find the nutrient foramen. This is the nutrient foramen on the lateral surface, distally inside the infraspinous fossa, nutrient foramen. Now let's start talking about the comparative anatomy of the scapula. And let's start with the lateral surface of the scapula and look at the supra and infraspinous fossa. If you remember, we said that the ratio between the supraspinous fossa and the infraspinous fossa in the horse is like 1 to 2. 1 to 2 in the horse. In the ox, In the ox, the ratio between the supraspinous fossa and the infraspinous fossa is 1 to 3. 1 to 3. In the sheep is also like 1 to 3, like the ox. In the dog, if you look exactly here, you can find that the ratio between these two fossae is 1 to 1. So that means the spine of the scapula is located exactly in the middle of the scapula. The same for the cat is also 1 to 1. 1 to 1. And in the camel, it's like 1 to 2 or 4 to 5, you know. This is how the size of the supraspinous fossa to the infraspinous fossa. And now let's move to the spine of the scapula. As we mentioned before, in all animals, as you can see here, the distal part of the spine of the scapula forms what's called the acromion. The acromion. The acromion is absent in the horse. So is absent, there is no acromion. Just like information, the acromion is the insertion area of the omotransversarius muscle. So the omotransversarius muscle doesn't insert to the acromion in the horse, but to the fascia found this area here and to the brachiocephalic muscle. So acromion is absent in the horse, is very developed and finger like shaped here in the camel. And if you look exactly, you will find that the acromion reaches the level of the glenoid cavity. The glenoid cavity, this cavity here for the articulation with the head of the humerus, so reaches the level of the glenoid cavity in the camel. In the ox, as you can see here, this is the acromion, it's above the glenoid cavity in the ox. The same for the sheep. In the dog is more flat, the acromion is more flat and reaches the level of the glenoid cavity like the camel. The same for the cat. The same for the cat, this is the acromion, reach the level of the glenoid cavity. This is the glenoid cavity. One more thing about the spine of the scapula, just in the case of horse, we can find the tuberosity of the spine of the scapula. So this is the tuberosity of the spine of the scapula, presents just in the horse. If you look at this one of other animals, so there is no tuberosity of the spine of the scapula. Okay. Now let's move to the medial surface. This is the medial surface of the scapula in different animal species. And let's start with the subscapular fossa. The subscapular fossa is deep in the horse, very clear and deep in the horse. If we look at that one of the ox, for example, it's shallow, so it's not that deep compared to that one of the horse. The same for the camel. Here in the sheep is also shallow, but it's very clear. The subscapular fossa is very clear comparing to that one of the ox. Let's move to the dog. Is very shallow and it's flat. We can describe it as a flat fossa here, the subscapular fossa. As we say, the subscapular fossa is the origin of the subscapular muscle in all animals. Is also flat in the cat. Okay, on the medial surface, we can also see the serrated face. Serrated face is a very rough surface in the horse and is divided into two triangular areas here and there. This is the serrated face, very clear, very rough. In the camel, yeah, this is the serrated face. It's not that clear. It's more smoother than that one of the horse. So there is, of course, a rough surface, but it's not that clear like the horse. The same for the ox. It's also located here and there, but it's not that clear. Same for the sheep. Here in the dog. In the dog, this is a little bit this serrated face located craniodorsally in this area, and it's more rectangular area here. This is the insertion, of course, of the ventral serrated muscle. So this is the serrated face of the scapula in the dog. Okay, located craniodorsally in this area here. Same for the cat. It's also located here on the medial surface of the scapula. Okay, good. If we move down, and look at the ventral angle of the scapula, where we can find the glenoid cavity. So we can find that the glenoid cavity of the camel is circular comparing to that one of the horse. And the horse is more oval shaped in the horse. Yeah, it's in the ox more circular shaped, like the glenoid cavity of the ox. The same the sheep. Here in the dog is also oval shaped, the same like the cat, oval shaped in the cat. This is for the articulation with the head of the humerus. Okay, let's look now at this big projection here, cranial to the glenoid cavity. This is the supraglenoid tubercle. The supraglenoid tubercle in the horse, for example, this is the horse, is very developed, rounded, very rough, and if you look exactly, you will find that it's located a little bit away from the glenoid cavity. Here we forgot to mention that the glenoid notch is present or very developed in the horse comparing to other animals. So if you look at that one of the ox, there is no notch here. There is no notch. The same for the sheep. There is no notch. There is no notch of the dog. And in the camel, it's very, very flat. The glenoid notch is very flat, but it's very clear, of course, in case of the horse. This is the glenoid notch. Let's go back to the supraglenoid tubercle. As we said, it's very rough, developed in the horse, located away from the glenoid cavity. The same like in the camels, also very big, rounded, rough, away from the glenoid cavity. So in the ox is a little bit more pointed, and yeah, it's located a little bit away from the glenoid cavity, but you know it's not really like that one of the horse. So it's near, let's say it's near the glenoid cavity. The same like that one of the sheep, or in the sheep it's more near or connected, so we can name it like connected to the glenoid cavity, the supraglenoid tubercle. The same like that one of the dog. The supraglenoid tubercle is connected is connected to the glenoid cavity here, is connected to the glenoid cavity. The same like that one of the cat is also connected to the glenoid cavity. Okay, what else? What we can also mention that in the dog, caudal, so we named this one, this projection cranial to the glenoid cavity, as a supraglenoid tubercle, and there is another small projection behind or caudal to the glenoid cavity called the infraglenoid tubercle in the dog, the infraglenoid tubercle in the dog. Here in the cat, this is also very important that we have this process here from the acromion, the hematos process, and in all animals we can see this small projection is very developed here, pointed, comes from the medial surface of the supraglenoid tubercle here. This is the coracoid process. The coracoid process. This is the coracoid process. Coracoid process, the origin of the coracobrachial muscle. This one here, the coracoid process. It's more developed here, rounded in the camel, for example, coracoid process. And finally here, I would like to mention that comparing to other animals, the cranial border of the scapula of the dog is in this area convex, forming distally what's called the scapular notch. The scapular notch. Let's compare this one with the horse, for example. This is the cranial border of the dog, and this is the cranial border. So the cranial border in this area is concave completely, and here it's more convex, forming the scapular notch. The same like that one of the cat, for example. The cat had the same situation where the cranial border is convex in this area, forming the scapular notch here, cranial to the neck of the scapula. It's not the case, for example, here. Let's compare this one to this one here. This is the cranial border, This is the cranial border, and this is the cranial border. The cranial border is here convex, concave, and forms the scapular notch. This is ox, and this is dog. Again, this is the scapula of the camel, the scapula of the horse, the scapula of the ox, sheep, dog, and cat. And now I need your help to tell me exactly if this is the right or the left scapula of the horse. How can we know that? Directions are very or extremely important to know where the lateral surface, medial surface, cranial, and caudal borders. This is all what you need to know. So lateral surface is very clear because of the spine of the scapula. Medial surface is the opposite side surface. Now we just need to know where the cranial border and the caudal border. To be able to do that, just look for this projection, the supraglenoid tubercle. It's very clear in all animals. This projection should be toward the head of the animal. So this is located cranial to the glenoid cavity. That means this is the cranial border, and this is the caudal border. Put the cranial border or the supraglenoid tubercle toward the head of the animal. In this case, you have to look at the caudal border of the scapula. So this is toward the head of the animal. This is the caudal toward the tail of the animal. Lateral because of the spine, medial, so it has to move to the right side because the lateral cervix should be away from the midline. To the right, that means this is the right scapula. Should we repeat? Again, this projection supraglenoid tubercle toward the head of the animal, you're looking at the caudal border of the scapula, and this is the lateral cervix away from the midline. So we cannot put it like this, yeah? In this case, it will be toward the midline. It should be away from the midline. In this case, this is the midline, this is the right of the animal. That means this is the right scapula of the horse. Let's take this one here of the sheep. Again, in the same way, try to find firstly the supraglenoid tubercle. The supraglenoid tubercle here, put it toward the head of the animal. You're looking at the caudal border. This is the lateral cervix, that means this is the midline, and in this case it's located left to the midline, so this is the left scapula of the sheep. Let's take another one. What about this one here, the scapula of the dog? The scapula of the dog, here we have again to find the supraglenoid tubercle. This is the supraglenoid tubercle, put it toward the head of the animal. You are looking at the caudal border, and this is the lateral surface because of the spine. That means this is the midline of the animal, so it's left to the midline. So this is the left scapula of the dog. Should we try with another one? What about this one of the cat? Let's go with this one here, where the supraglenoid tubercle, this is the supraglenoid tubercle. Just look at the glenoid cavity. Look at the glenoid cavity, cranial to it. We have this tubercle, supraglenoid tubercle, toward the head of the animal. You're looking at the caudal border. This is the lateral cervix. That means this is the midline, and this is here, to the left to the midline. So that means this is the left scapula of the cat. Let's go for this one here. This is the scapula of the ox. The scapula of the ox, where the supraglenoid tubercle, this is the supraglenoid tubercle. Put it toward the head of the animal. You're looking at the caudal border. Okay, this is the lateral surface because of the spine. This is the midline of the animal, away from the midline. So left to the midline, that means this is the left scapula of the ox. Finally, let's end up with this scapula here of the camel, where the supraglenoid tubercle is very developed here, located cranial to the glenoid cavity. Yeah, cranial to the glenoid cavity. And that's why we have to put it toward the head of the animal. You're looking at the caudal border of the scapula. This is the spine, lateral cervix. This is the midline. It's located right to the midline. That means this is the right scapula of the camel. Thank you very much.